the kind that happens quietly, without headlines or concern. Princess Charlotte was scheduled for a follow-up examination after a minor health issue. No urgency, no visible risk, just another appointment on a tightly managed royal calendar. She arrived smiling, restless, unaware that this ordinary moment would quietly fracture the future of the monarchy. Blood samples were taken, labels attached, forms signed. Everything followed protocol until one line of data appeared on a secure laboratory screen. The lead geneticist froze, not because of disease, not because of danger, because what appeared should not have existed at all. The anomaly wasn't flagged once, it was flagged twice, as if the system itself was questioning reality. Within minutes, the atmosphere inside the laboratory changed. Voices dropped, screens were turned away. A secure phone line was activated, one reserved exclusively for matters of state-level medical concern. The call did not go through intermediaries. It went straight to Kensington Palace, direct, controlled, quiet. The message was deliberately restrained, but its meaning was unmistakable. Non-urgent, the voice said, but a significant genetic irregularity has been detected. Prince William was summoned immediately. No briefing, no explanation, no advance warning. He was instructed to come alone. When the file was placed in his hands, he read it without speaking. Once, then again. His expression didn't show fear. It showed disbelief. This was not a health crisis. It was something far more destabilizing. The anomaly did not suggest illness or weakness. It suggested deviation. A deviation so profound it raised questions no royal ever expects to face. Questions about bloodlines, about inheritance, about legacy. How could this exist in Charlotte's DNA? Why had nothing like it ever appeared in the Royal Medical Archives? And most troubling of all, how long had someone known this was possible? Within an hour, a confidential meeting was convened. Not the highest-ranking advisors, the most loyal ones. Phones were surrendered, notes were forbidden, doors were sealed. Medical specialists were flown in without documentation. Their arrivals were unrecorded, their names omitted. What was discussed inside that room was not a child's health. It was the future of the crown. Catherine was told only that additional testing was required. Nothing more. Staff were dismissed early. Security around Charlotte's residence was quietly doubled. The palace did not erupt into chaos. It did something far more dangerous. It went silent. And within that silence, something ancient began to stir. Because this discovery was not simply unexpected, it was unprecedented. And if the world ever learned what had been identified inside the blood of a 10-year-old princess, nothing about the monarchy would remain untouched. Behind closed doors, elite geneticists began a deeper analysis of Charlotte's genome. They ruled out illness, they ruled out contamination, they ruled out paternity. What remained defied every known record of royal heredity. Embedded deep within her genetic structure was a rare configuration, not a mutation in the traditional sense, but a dormant sequence with extraordinary implications. A gene that appeared inactive, yet deliberately structured, as if waiting. They called it an unprecedented anomaly. Internally, another phrase circulated more quietly: hyperadaptive cellular regeneration. On paper, it bordered on science fiction. Under specific conditions, the gene suggested accelerated tissue repair, faster bone recovery, cellular regeneration without scarring. But those implications were only the beginning. More alarming was what appeared in the neurological data, patterns indicating unusually dense neural connectivity, potentially enhanced memory consolidation, accelerated learning capacity, possibly even expanded cognitive awareness. This was not supposed to exist in any royal bloodline. Comparisons across European genetic archives produced nothing. Some markers showed distant similarities to isolated genetic traits observed only in untouched populations, tribes in the Amazon, ancient Arctic communities, evolutionary paths preserved far from modern interference. And yet here it was, inside the House of Windsor. The implications were staggering. Within hours, the room fractured into opposing camps. One side saw possibility. They spoke in hushed tones about medical breakthroughs, treatments for neurodegenerative disease, regenerative medicine, even cellular aging. One scientist suggested this discovery could redefine modern healthcare. The others were far less optimistic. They saw catastrophe. Because if this gene did not exist in either parent, and early indicators suggested it did not, the question of origin became unavoidable, and once that question surfaced, nothing would survive it. Succession, legitimacy, public trust, centuries of carefully maintained lineage. If this truth ever surfaced, tabloids would not call it a miracle, they would call it betrayal. For now, silence prevailed. Protocols were drafted, files encrypted, contingency statements prepared, but a deeper fear lingered in the room. What if this anomaly wasn't random? What if it had been introduced? Because in a family where lineage is everything, the most dangerous question is always the same. Where did it come from? Quietly, without informing the wider family, full parental DNA analysis was ordered. William and Catherine submitted samples under the guise of routine verification. The results were definitive. Neither parent carried the gene, not dominant, not recessive, not dormant. By all known science, Charlotte's genetic signature should not exist. The silence that followed was absolute. Advisors urged immediate containment. Any leak would be catastrophic, but internally, theories spiraled beyond science. Medical interference, embryonic manipulation, fertility procedures long buried in sealed archives. A possibility once considered unthinkable gained traction, that a third-party genetic contribution had occurred, deliberately or otherwise. If true, it would explain everything, and destroy everything. William withdrew. Long-standing aides resigned without explanation. Trusted confidants were shut out. Heated arguments erupted behind palace doors. He was no longer protecting an institution. He was protecting an idea. And then, someone from the past stepped forward. She had been there from the beginning. An embryologist once embedded within the Crown's most secure medical division. Her departure years earlier had passed without notice. Her name was Dr. Helena Vaughan. And now, nearly a decade later, she was willing to risk everything. She requested immediate access to Charlotte's private physician. Her voice did not shake from fear, but from the weight of what she carried. She spoke of classified laboratories, of restricted procedures, of a program buried beneath layers of authorization. Project Aragon. Officially, it had been framed as reproductive safety research for high-risk heirs. Unofficially, its purpose went much further. Gene intervention, resilience engineering, evolutionary insurance. According to Helena, the final approval had come from the highest authority, Queen Elizabeth II herself. In her final years, Helena claimed, the Queen had grown increasingly concerned about the monarchy's survival in a rapidly destabilizing world. Tradition, she believed, would no longer be enough. Charlotte was the first test case. William and Catherine had never been told. When whispers of Charlotte's anomaly surfaced outside secure channels, Helena knew the truth would not remain buried, and once she spoke, the pressure began immediately. Threats, surveillance, warnings disguised as concern. Someone wanted her silent. At the same time, Charlotte began to change. At first, subtly. Unusual clarity, memories of places she had never been, fluent fragments of ancient languages she had never studied. She corrected historians, recalled lost letters, identified documents no one believed still existed. Physical signs followed. Accelerated healing, unnatural balance, an absence of pain where pain should exist. Doctors found nothing wrong, but nothing explained it either. Inside the palace, whispers turned to fear. Miracle, experiment, something else entirely. And then Charlotte asked to see Queen Elizabeth's private journals, volumes sealed since the monarch's death. When permission was granted, Charlotte opened one at random and read aloud an entry describing a dream, a future queen, ancient memory, untouchable light. She was dreaming of me, Charlotte said. Catherine broke. William did not speak, because buried beneath Windsor Castle, in a chamber sealed for over a decade, waited a final letter, addressed not to Charles, not to William, but to my future heir of flame. And once that letter was found, the monarchy would never be the same. No one could explain how Charlotte knew the chamber existed. The room lay beneath Windsor, sealed for more than a decade. Its access code had been changed twice, its existence referenced only in fragmented archival maps that most historians believed were symbolic rather than literal. Yet one morning, Charlotte described it, not vaguely, precisely. She spoke of a narrow corridor behind the eastern vault, of a wall panel carved with a faded crest, of a desk engraved with a lion, its second drawer jammed slightly to the left. Inside it, she said, there would be a velvet-lined box with a clasp shaped like fire. Security escorts accompanied the archivists, expecting nothing. Everything she described was there. The box contained a single envelope, aged, unopened, marked in Queen Elizabeth's unmistakable hand. To my future heir of flame. The room went cold. The letter inside was not ceremonial, it was not affectionate, it was deliberate. Elizabeth wrote of fear, not of scandal, but of irrelevance, of a monarchy facing a world reshaped by technology, data, and instability. She confessed that tradition alone could not withstand what was coming. To remain unchanged, she wrote, is to disappear. She described Project Aragon not as ambition, but as necessity. A controlled intervention meant to safeguard continuity in a future she believed would be unforgiving to symbols without substance. William was mentioned, not by name, but by nature. She described him as steady, dutiful, built for preservation, but questioned whether preservation would be enough. The future, she believed, would not reward stability. It would demand adaptation. Charlotte, she wrote, carried both flame and memory, not chosen by law, not chosen by Parliament, chosen because she could endure what others could not. Catherine read the letter in silence, tears falling without sound. Not from betrayal, but from grief. Grief that her daughter's life had been shaped by decisions made without her consent. William reacted differently. He left the chamber without a word. For him, the letter was not prophecy, it was theft. The theft of choice, the theft of lineage, the theft of everything he believed the crown stood for. Within days, rumors escaped the palace. Not details, impressions. Enough to ignite speculation. Then came the leak. A fragment of genetic data appeared on a closed scientific forum. Anonymous, partially redacted, but unmistakable. Researchers recognized the anomaly immediately. Within hours, it was everywhere. News networks broke programming. Geneticists debated live on air. Theories collided. Divine anomaly, synthetic intervention, evolutionary leap. Hashtags trended globally. Royal DNA, next evolution, princess code. Outside the palace gates, cameras gathered like a storm. Inside Parliament, outrage exploded. Calls for inquiry, demands for accountability, questions that cut straight to constitutional bone. Had the monarchy authorized genetic manipulation? Had succession been compromised? Was Charlotte even eligible under existing law? One motion went further than the rest. It suggested her removal from the line of succession, not as punishment, but as containment. Inside the palace, the family fractured. Catherine refused to leave Charlotte's side. All appearances were canceled. All testing halted. She became immovable. William was torn apart. Publicly, he issued a statement, controlled, measured, carefully empty. He neither confirmed nor denied the leak. He asked for privacy. He emphasized that Charlotte was a child. What he did not say echoed louder than any denial. Advisors closed in. They framed their recommendation gently. Remove Charlotte quietly. Step her away from succession. Protect her by erasing her. They called it strategy. William heard it as surrender. A private vote was held, unofficial, unrecorded. The result was clear. The institution would choose survival over sentiment. Then Catherine stood. "If you push her out," she said, calm and unyielding, "I leave, with or without him." That night, William vanished. He retreated to a remote estate, cutting off advisors, aides, even family. Only one object accompanied him, the Queen's letter. He read it until the words felt burned into him. What kind of king, he asked himself, protects a crown that demands the exile of his own child? Days later, Charlotte found him. She did not cry, she did not plead. She asked one question: "If I don't want to be queen, Tree, will they let me be me?" William could not answer, because the truth was unbearable. The monarchy did not release what it feared, it contained it. The following morning, William returned to London, without press, without ceremony. He visited Lambeth Palace and handed the Archbishop a sealed envelope. No one knows what was written inside, but everyone felt the shift. Because later that day, Charlotte did something no one had anticipated. She stepped forward, not as a princess, not as an heir, but as herself. She requested a single unscripted appearance. No speechwriters, no advisors, no declarations. Just her. And when she spoke, the world listened. Not because of her blood, but because of her calm. She said she did not want power. She did not want a throne. She did not want to be hidden. She wanted to live, to learn, to choose. The silence that followed was absolute, because for the first time in centuries, the monarchy faced something it could not command, a child who refused to be shaped by fear. And in that moment, everything changed. Not with abdication, not with revolution, but with a decision. William chose his daughter, and in doing so, he rewrote the meaning of the crown. The palace had faced scandals before, affairs, abdications, wars of reputation. But this was different. This was not about behavior. It was about design. Within hours of Charlotte's appearance, emergency meetings ignited across Europe. Constitutional scholars were summoned. Legal interpretations were rewritten in real time. One question dominated every closed-door discussion. If a monarch is engineered, does the monarchy still belong to history or to science? Markets reacted first. Sterling dipped. Defense committees convened. Foreign intelligence agencies quietly requested access to the leaked data because Charlotte's genome wasn't just a royal problem anymore, it was a geopolitical one. Behind the scenes, pressure mounted on William to retract the appearance, to issue clarification, to walk it back. He refused. For the first time in his life, he stopped playing the role written for him. That refusal triggered the contingency protocols no one outside the palace had ever heard of. Files marked Crown Continuity were unlocked, succession flowcharts redrawn, emergency regency scenarios activated. Charlotte's name began disappearing from documents, not erased, replaced. Inside Parliament, factions formed overnight. Some argued Charlotte represented the future, not just of the monarchy, but of humanity. Others called her existence unconstitutional, unethical, even dangerous. One MP said it openly, "You cannot build a crown on a laboratory." Religious authorities weighed in next. Statements were carefully worded, but the implication was clear. If divine right was once the foundation of monarchy, where did that leave a child shaped by human hands? The word abomination was never officially used, but it was heard. Meanwhile, Charlotte changed again. Not physically, mentally. She began asking questions no 10-year-old should frame so clearly. Why do people fear what they don't control? Why does blood matter more than choice? Why do crowns survive longer than kindness? Catherine watched her closely, not with fear, with awe, because Charlotte wasn't losing her childhood. She was outgrowing the lie around it. Then the threats escalated, not from tabloids, from institutions. Anonymous letters arrived at the palace demanding restrictions. International committees requested custody for observation. A proposal surfaced suggesting Charlotte be relocated abroad for her own safety. Catherine tore it apart. William finally understood the truth. This was never about protecting Charlotte. It was about neutralizing her. That night, another breach occurred, this time deliberate. A second file leaked, smaller, older. Project Aragon wasn't singular. Charlotte wasn't the first concept, she was the first success. Buried within archived documents were references to earlier attempts, abandoned embryos, terminated trials, ethical vetoes overridden in silence. Charlotte survived because she adapted. The world reeled, public sentiment fractured. Some saw her as hope, others as proof humanity had crossed a line it could never return from. Protests erupted outside royal residences, not against the child, against the idea. Stop engineering kings. Children are not crowns. End genetic monarchy. William was given one final ultimatum. Publicly distance himself from Charlotte's anomaly, or abdicate. Not step aside. Abdicate. The crown had chosen. That night, William made his decision. He released the letter. Queen Elizabeth's letter. In full. Unedited. No interpretation, no framing, just truth. The reaction was immediate and violent in its honesty. The Queen had known. She had authorized it. She had believed survival required evolution. The myth shattered. The monarchy stood exposed, not as timeless, but as afraid. And then Charlotte did the unthinkable. She disappeared. Not abducted, not hidden. She left. A single note was found in her room, written in careful, steady handwriting. "I won't be your future or your fear. I will be my own." Panic surged. Boarders were alerted. Security forces mobilized. But William stopped it. Let her go. Because for the first time, the Crown had no right to chase her. Days later, a video surfaced. No palace backdrop, no flags, just Charlotte, sitting at a table, calm, clear. She spoke for less than a minute. "I didn't choose how I was born," she said, "but I choose who I become, and no crown decides that." The video ended. The monarchy did not fall that day, but it changed forever, because history would remember this moment not as the rise of a super heir, but as the day a child broke the oldest system in the world by refusing to belong to it. And in doing so, he rewrote the meaning of the crown. Charlotte's disappearance didn't create chaos, it created fear, not the loud kind, the controlled institutional kind, because within hours, something became clear to every intelligence agency involved. She hadn't run away, she had planned it. No border alerts were triggered, no facial recognition pings, no digital footprints. For a child raised under constant surveillance, this was impossible, unless she knew how the system worked, and that realization changed everything. Deep inside MI6, a classified task force was quietly activated, not to find Charlotte, but to determine how much she knew. Because the methods used to vanish weren't instinctive, they were procedural. Charlotte had disabled layers of tracking most adults didn't even know existed. She avoided predictive travel algorithms. She moved through blind zones only insiders mapped. Someone had taught her, or she had learned on her own. Both options were terrifying. Meanwhile, the world reacted. Universities debated her existence in emergency ethics panels. Tech billionaires offered sanctuary. Governments quietly discussed asylum scenarios. One leaked memo revealed something chilling. If Charlotte is allowed autonomy, she becomes precedent. Not a person. A precedent. Inside the palace, William unraveled, not publicly, privately, because buried in Project Aragon files he hadn't seen before was a detail that froze him. Charlotte's gene wasn't designed for dominance. It was designed for resilience, not to rule, to survive collapse. The architects of Aragon hadn't been trying to build a queen. They were trying to build continuity after failure, a human who could remember when systems fell, adapt when institutions broke, think beyond hierarchy. The monarchy hadn't planned for a ruler. They had planned for what comes after rulers stop mattering. And Charlotte was never meant to wear a crown. She was meant to outlast it. That was the truth Queen Elizabeth never wrote directly, but implied between the lines. The crown wasn't preparing for succession, it was preparing for extinction, and Charlotte was the contingency. When this interpretation leaked to select media figures, public sentiment shifted violently. The narrative flipped. Charlotte was no longer seen as a threat. She became a mirror. If a 10-year-old could reject power designed for her, what did that say about everyone still clinging to it? Protests changed tone. Let her choose. End forced legacy. Children are not insurance policies. Then came the second video, shorter, unannounced, no explanation of location. Charlotte looked tired this time, not scared, tired. "I know they're looking for me," she said. "I know why they made me." She paused. "But survival without choice isn't life, it's storage." That line spread faster than anything before it. Quoted, printed, etched onto signs. Inside Parliament, emergency motions collapsed. No one wanted to be the one recorded opposing a child who spoke with that clarity. The Archbishop requested a private meeting with William, not about faith, about responsibility. "What happens," he asked, "when the symbol grows wiser than the system?" William had no answer, because the truth was brutal. Charlotte didn't need protection. The world needed protection from what she represented. A future where bloodline meant nothing, where engineered destiny could be refused, where the crown was just an artifact. And then the final fracture happened. A whistleblower from Project Aragon released the last sealed file. Its title, Phase 2, Post-Monarch Human Governance. The implication detonated globally. Charlotte wasn't the end. She was the beginning. And now the question wasn't where she was. It was whether she would ever come back. Charlotte did not appear on screen by accident. Nothing about what happened next was spontaneous, emotional, or uncontrolled. That was the most unsettling part. She wasn't reacting to the chaos around her. She was ahead of it. The live broadcast began without an introduction. No royal insignia, no statement, no apology, just a quiet frame, neutral light, and Charlotte sitting perfectly still, hands folded, eyes steady. The world froze the moment it recognized her. "I know you're looking for answers," she said calmly, "but the questions you're asking are already too late." Inside the palace, alarms triggered simultaneously. Legal teams rushed. Cybersecurity units scrambled to trace the signal. Advisors shouted over one another, issuing orders that contradicted each other by the second. But nothing stopped the feed, because the signal wasn't coming from a studio. It wasn't coming from anywhere they could reach. "I was never sick," Charlotte continued. "I was never in danger. I was prepared." That single word, prepared, sent shockwaves through every institution listening. She spoke slowly, choosing each sentence with unsettling precision. "They call it protection when adults make decisions for children, but when those decisions are made before the child exists, it's not protection, it's design." The name Project Aragon appeared on screen behind her, projected softly like a watermark. No files yet, no data dumps, just the name. Enough to confirm everything. Within minutes, global news networks cut into emergency coverage. Scientists leaned forward in disbelief. Constitutional experts stopped speculating and started calculating consequences in real time. Charlotte didn't raise her voice. She didn't accuse. She explained. They believed the monarchy wouldn't survive the future, so they tried to engineer one. Her gaze never wavered. Not a ruler, a contingency. That was when the tone changed. This wasn't about a genetic anomaly anymore. This was about intent. She described fragments, not full confessions, but enough to connect the dots. Advanced embryonic screening, selective gene activation, neural adaptability protocols, not to make her stronger, but to make her different. "I was meant to remember," she said, "not history as stories, but history as pattern." Inside Buckingham Palace, William stood frozen in front of a screen he couldn't look away from. For the first time, the truth was unfolding without him being able to shape it, delay it, or soften it. He wasn't watching a scandal. He was watching his daughter step outside a system that had existed for centuries. "She doesn't sound coached," one advisor whispered. "No," another replied quietly. "She sounds finished with us." Charlotte paused for the first time. Then she said something that no briefing, no protocol, no emergency plan had prepared them for. "I'm not here to expose anyone. Exposure is temporary." She leaned slightly forward. "I'm here to end the assumption that I belong to you." The palace phones began ringing non-stop. Heads of state requested immediate clarification. Parliament demanded a response. Markets reacted before governments did. "And still," she continued, "there are people who want me removed from the line of succession," she said evenly. "There are people who want me hidden, and there are people who want to study me." A faint, almost sad smile crossed her face. "All of those options are about ownership." Then she looked directly into the camera. "I don't accept any of them." Behind the scenes, emergency succession discussions began collapsing under their own weight. Because for the first time, the threat to the monarchy wasn't scandal, it was irrelevance. Charlotte wasn't asking for power, she wasn't challenging authority, she was withdrawing meaning from it. "And before anyone decides for me," she added, "I want one thing understood." The screen behind her went dark. Only her voice remained. "I'm not finished speaking." The broadcast cut to black. No explanation, no follow-up, just silence. And that silence was heavier than any confession. Because now the world knew two things. Charlotte knew far more than anyone expected. Whatever came next would not be negotiated behind palace doors. This wasn't a conclusion. It was the first irreversible step. The blackout lasted exactly 47 seconds. In that silence, something irreversible happened. Not in the palace, not in government offices, but in the public mind. People didn't speculate. They recalibrated. The old assumptions collapsed quietly, without drama. The monarchy wasn't under attack. It was being redefined without consent. When the feed returned, Charlotte was no longer alone. The frame widened just enough to reveal a second chair beside her, empty. "I expected them to cut the signal," she said calmly, as if commenting on the weather. "They always underestimate redundancy." Her eyes flicked briefly to the side, not for reassurance, not for instruction, but acknowledgement. Someone else was listening, someone not visible. "I won't say names," she continued, "because this isn't about guilt. It's about structure." Inside the palace, the emergency council fractured into factions. One side wanted immediate damage control, discredit the broadcast, question her mental state, frame it as stress. Another wanted silence, no response, no engagement, let it burn itself out. A third, smaller, quieter, understood the truth. You cannot outspin someone who isn't asking for belief. "She's not accusing us," one senior official said slowly. "She's positioning herself outside us." That was the panic point. Charlotte leaned back slightly, her posture relaxed in a way no royal training manual would ever allow. "Some of you think this is about inheritance," she said. "It's not." A faint overlay appeared. No documents yet, just timelines, dates, gaps, decisions that had never been explained publicly. "I was never meant to rule after someone," she said. "I was meant to exist instead of uncertainty." That sentence hit harder than any allegation. Across social media, arguments erupted instantly, not about whether she was telling the truth, but about whether any institution had the right to do what she was describing. "I'm not special," Charlotte added, anticipating the backlash. "I'm not unique. I'm simply the first one who grew up knowing." She paused, and knowing changes the equation. Behind closed doors, intelligence agencies began pulling archived files, projects long buried under euphemisms like future resilience, continuity assurance, adaptive governance. Nothing illegal on paper, everything indefensible in context. William finally spoke, not publicly, privately. "Get me a direct line," he said. "To her, not advisors, not intermediaries." The reply came seconds later. "She's declined." That was the moment he understood. This wasn't rebellion. It was separation. Back on screen, Charlotte's tone softened, not emotionally but strategically. "I understand fear," she said. "I was raised inside it." She described rooms without windows, evaluations disguised as games, adults who asked questions no child should ever be asked, then praised her for answering calmly. "They weren't cruel," she clarified. "They were careful. Careful enough to erase their own fingerprints." The empty chair beside her finally made sense. It wasn't symbolic. It was reserved. "For those wondering what happens next," Charlotte continued, "nothing dramatic. That unsettled people more than threats ever could. No abdications, no declarations, no chaos." She looked directly into the lens. "Just distance." The word echoed. "I will continue my education," she said. "I will continue my work, but not as an extension of an institution that planned my existence before my consent was possible." Inside Parliament, emergency legal debates ignited. There was no precedent for this. No clause for a royal heir who refused context rather than title. The broadcast clocked past 12 minutes, far longer than anyone expected it to last. "I'm not asking to be believed," Charlotte concluded. "I'm asking to be understood eventually." She stood. "For now, this is enough." As she stepped out of frame, the empty chair remained visible for a few seconds longer than necessary. Then the feed ended. This time, it didn't cut. It closed. It was the first irreversible step. The silence after the broadcast was louder than the broadcast itself. No emergency statement followed, no royal address, no denial. For the first time in centuries, the monarchy did not respond. Markets dipped briefly, then stabilized. Governments issued carefully neutral statements. Scientists argued on live television, not about the ethics anymore, but about the implications. Religious leaders split. Some called it blasphemy, others called it destiny. The public, however, moved faster than institutions ever could. They didn't ask whether Charlotte was telling the truth. They asked why no one was denying it. Inside the palace, William stood alone in a room he had known his entire life, yet had never felt like a stranger until now. The walls were the same. The portraits were the same. But the air had changed. Something invisible had been removed, like pressure suddenly released. "She didn't attack us," he said quietly to no one in particular. "She stepped outside us." That was the part no one had prepared for. Catherine had not spoken since the broadcast ended. She sat beside Charlotte that night, brushing her hair the way she had when she was small. Not as a princess, not as a subject of controversy, just as a child who had carried something far too heavy far too early. "Did they tell you to say all that?" Catherine asked softly. Charlotte shook her head. "They taught me how not to lie," she replied. "They never taught me how to obey forever." William understood then that there would be no way back. Not because of scandal, but because of clarity. Once something is seen clearly, pretending otherwise becomes impossible. Parliament convened in emergency session. Lawyers searched for language that didn't exist. There was no framework for a royal who refused definition rather than duty. Removing Charlotte from the line of succession would ignite public outrage. Keeping her in would invite questions no one could answer. And Charlotte herself remained unreachable. She did not hide. She simply disengaged. No interviews, no statements, no appearances, just one final transmission, released quietly 48 hours later, without announcement. This time there was no dramatic framing, no music, no symbolism, just Charlotte seated at a plain table. "The chair you saw before," she said calmly, "was never meant for a ruler." She paused. "It was meant for a witness." She explained then, not everything, but enough. Project Aragon had not created her alone. It had mapped possibilities, branches of futures. Most were abandoned. Some were erased. A few were monitored. Charlotte was not the only child altered in the name of continuity. She was simply the only one born inside a crown. The others, she said, were placed outside power, outside scrutiny, outside history. The chair, she revealed, was reserved for the first of them willing to step forward, not to claim anything, but to be seen. "I won't lead," Charlotte said, "and I won't disappear." She looked directly into the camera. "But I won't protect a system that protects itself more than people." The transmission ended without farewell. Within hours, sealed archives were leaked, not by Charlotte, by those who realized silence was no longer survival. Names surfaced, programs, authorizations signed decades ago. None of it was illegal when written. All of it was indefensible when understood. The monarchy did not fall. It fractured. William made his decision quietly, as his mother once had, behind closed doors. He remained, but he redrew lines no one thought movable. Medical oversight was dismantled. Classified programs were exposed. Titles remained, but authority shifted. Charlotte was officially listed as temporarily withdrawn from succession for personal development. The public read between the lines. She was no longer a future queen. She was something else entirely. Years passed. Charlotte grew, not into secrecy, but into distance. She studied where she chose, lived where she wished. When she spoke, the world listened, not because of a crown, but because of consistency. She never accused, never threatened, never demanded. She simply existed without permission, and that changed everything. Because for the first time in modern history, power encountered something it could not command, silence, or define. Not rebellion, not revolution, autonomy. In a private letter never meant to be published, William wrote one final line to his daughter: "You were born into history. You chose the future." Charlotte never responded in writing. But years later, when asked whether she regretted stepping away from the throne, she gave a small, knowing smile. "I didn't step away," she said. "I stepped forward, just not where they expected." And somewhere, far from palaces and protocols, a second chair finally filled, not with a ruler, but with someone who remembered.